we make sense of those things? Because we can make a list, okay, there's different perspectives and different opinions and different experiences, and we can have our list of all the things that make it complicated. But how do we make sense of that list? How do we organize the list? So are there groups of variables that we can identify? Are there behaviors that are more important or valid than others that make it more or less complicated? So those are things that we have to consider, because it's not enough to just say, well, these are all the reasons why it can be challenging. Okay, well, now that we know those things, how do we take those and do something about it? We use symbols to communicate, one of the very complicated elements of communication, something we often don't even really identify or recognize either, which is interesting. So we have words, sounds, or visual devices that represent a thought, concept, or object. So we have words like plop. That is a very specific word that represents a concept. And then we have sounds. So, we hear clapping and we recognize that that means we are happy, or we're cheering, or we are, rewarding or recognizing someone. And then we have visual devices. So we have the thumbs up sign, or we have the okay sign, or we have the peace sign. We have things as a culture that we've identified that represent something to us. And what's interesting is, in other parts of the world, symbols are very different, and therefore communication can be challenging, because what means something to us in American culture certainly does not mean the same thing in another culture. And symbols have various meanings and interpretations, as they are merely representations of something else. I personally do not cuss, and I don't necessarily think that it's ever appropriate, but I know there are many people that have a different opinion on that. But what's interesting is the people that often will argue with me that cussing shouldn't matter and it's no big deal, they will say a 4-letter word is only society's way of indicating that something is inappropriate. And so you could argue that crap, saying that's crap, 4-letter word meaning it's something that you don't like, someone would argue that saying the S 4-letter word would really be the same thing, because it's just one is a little more socially acceptable, but you're communicating the exact same idea. And so the various meanings and interpretations vary based on your upbringing, your family history, your language of origin. If you grew up speaking another language and then learned English, you may have a different acceptable vocabulary. I know that in England, I was a student ambassador and traveled to England, and some of the words that we would consider harmless are very offensive over there. And so you just really have to kind of be aware that, gosh, it's so much bigger than just a word and what that word means to us. We have rules, okay? So rules define what behavior is either obligated, so we absolutely have to act in this way, preferred, so, well, it would be really great if you would act like this, or prohibited, so you absolutely may not do this in certain situations or contexts. So that might be something that you want to consider in your post. Maybe define what a rule that you think would be, I'm obligated, I'm preferred, or I'm prohibited in this context or this situation. That might be something interesting to kind of consider from your perspective, at least, how we define what those behaviors are. It could be explicit or implicit. So it could be, this is absolutely clearly defined. It is absolutely written in stone. We know that if you are talking to your mother, you do not cuss at her, because she has made it very clear that that is absolutely inappropriate behavior. Then you may have implicit, wherein if you are in the presence of royalty, for example, you would be very couth and very polished, and you would try your best to come across as, pretty eloquent and well-spoken, because there's a level of respect that goes with royalty. So that's not necessarily explicit, but it's just kind of implied, which is another way to say implicit. So you just kind of get a sense of this is what should be. And what's interesting is the rules are developed by those involved in the relationship or by culture. So your culture may dictate that you act a certain way, but if you are with your best friend, you might mutually decide, either explicitly where you actually have a conversation about it, or implicitly where it just becomes understood that, yes, my culture dictates these things, but when you and I are together, we can change and modify that because we are kind of creating our own set of rules, which is very normal. We have different rules for different relationships. And mutually defined and agreed upon rules are what needs to happen, because you may have a definition or an agreement within yourself of this is what's acceptable, and the other person in the relationship may have a very different definition or agreement. So it's mutually decided upon, and then interestingly renegotiated as the relationship develops. So if you think about like early in a dating relationship, you act a certain way and you're testing the waters and you're trying to get to know each other, and the longer you're together, the more things change. And so you renegotiate, okay, I used to be really proper, or really appropriate or quiet, or whatever you were trying to present when you were early in the relationship, and then kind of more of your real personality comes out, or you kind of lessen the rules a little bit. I don't have to be so put together or so appropriate all the time, whatever. So as you go through the relationship, you renegotiate rules. And basically general rules, I kind of feel like I'm covering the basics here, but kind of as a general consensus, you respect others' privacy, you don't reveal other people's secrets, and these are communication rules, not rules for life. I guess you could make them rules for life, but specifically to communication. You make eye contact when you're conversing, and we'll actually cover a lot about eye contact and how it changes in the course of a communication and whatever. And then don't criticize another person in public. Those are kind of general communication rules, just to kind of give you a baseline, if you will. And as something else to consider, where do we learn rules? We talked about it's by culture. We talked about it's, kind of obligated, preferred, or prohibited, but where do we learn those things? I think you could probably argue from lots of places. So I would just be kind of interested to hear your own thoughts, your personal comments on that. Where did you learn communication rules, or where do you think they come from exclusively in our culture? So content and relationship dimensions. The content in communication refers to the information, ideas, and actions the speaker wishes to share. Basically, it's what is said. So what you say is the content of the communication exchange. The relationship dimension is more implied and offers cues about the emotion, the attitudes, and amount of power and control the speaker feels. It's how the message is communicated. So content, what is said. Relationship dimension, how it is communicated. So that's where your feelings come in, and your attitudes, and what you are communicating outside of just your words. So the method by which you communicate and the impression that people get from the interaction, that is more of the relationship dimension.